It's interesting how the things we miss most nowadays are the same things we didn't think twice about before this pandemic. Doing homework in the student union, seeing strangers at the light rail, going to class. It has been more than a year since this all started, but things feel uncertain still. Are we making the right decisions? How can we move past this? What will the future look like? Have we seen this before? In searching for answers to the previous questions, given the cyclical nature of history, it may be helpful to look backwards to a similar time, to one of the most deadly pandemics in human history. One of the earliest recorded appearances of the Black Death was in 1347 Crimea. Military leader Kipchak Khan Jani Beg struggled to take over a trading port in Kaffa due to the fact his forces were debilitated by disease. In order to break the stalemate, Jani Beg catapulted the corpses of those who had succumbed into the town in hopes of weaponizing the plague. From the port in Kaffa, Crimea, the plague traveled in 12 ships to the Sicilian port of Messina. Authorities did their best to order the ships out, but the plague had already landed. Roughly 20 million people died in the next 5 years alone. In the 1300s, the church was the ultimate spiritual and moral authority, so when this abrupt, inexplicable loss of life placed immense psychological trauma on people, the church was left with an enormous demand for guidance that they could not deliver. The clergy, in fact, made up of mostly older people in constant contact with potential plague carriers, experienced a great loss of life compared to the rest of the population. Some churches lost up to half of their staff, decreasing the quality of their services and leaving them with a sour reputation in the eyes of their followers. As a result, many focused their energies in self-redemption. Without any scientific explanation to their circumstances, people were left to believe that the plague was God's punishment. Flagellant groups would publicly whip themselves seeking repentance. Others would stitch together theories as to why they were being punished, the majority of which concluded that it was because of the existence of the Jews. In order to end the plague and Jewish sin, they sought to eradicate the Jewish community, members of which, in reality, were bearing just as much pain as anyone. Fast forward now to the COVIDian experience in the United States. The parallels contemporary pandemic models the Black Death in numerous ways. One being the prosecution of a minority group as a scapegoat. During the Black Death, Jews were persecuted as a means to soothe the majority Christian paranoia. They thought that the plague was in some part due to Jews tampering with the water supply, that the plague was God's punishment for Jewish sin, whatever reason they could find to unreasonably justify the treatment of Jews and to channel their frustration. This has parallels to the treatment of Asian Americans once COVID grew in prominence within the United States. It has manifested as, according to an article by the LA Times, anti-Asian hate crimes increased 146% across 26 of the country's largest jurisdictions, with the normalization of terms such as China virus. Another parallel is the psychological impact. During the Black Death, as evident from the prevalence of death in European artwork, the displacement of blame, and the prevalence of flagellants who sought salvation through self-punishment, there was an overall rise in anxiety throughout the civilization. Similarly, comparing January to June, before the COVID pandemic to during the pandemic, the average share of adults in the United States reporting symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder rose from 11% to 41.1%, with particular prevalence in young adults, women with children, people of color, and essential workers. Lastly, there has been a rising mistrust of authority, particularly if said authority goes against an individual's political views. Similarly to the growing distrust of the clergy during the Black Death, those who supposedly had the answer to the plague were succumbing, perhaps the most quickly themselves. This led individuals to seek salvation for themselves elsewhere, potentially through the persecution of Jews and through the flagellant movement. Today, while the clergy are still authority to many, those who are skeptical of what the government does in the U.S. may be tempted to find their own salvation. This can manifest with individuals who are anti-mask, people believing pseudoscientific methods can cure COVID, and dishonest marketing of products targeting vulnerable people. However, none of this is to say that this time is without its differences. Given our technological and scientific advancements from the Black Plague, for example, the discovering of penicillin, the germ theory of disease, The discovery of vaccination and the improvement of medical equipment has been crucial in keeping COVID from having the same devastating infrastructural damage that the Black Death did on Afro-Eurasia. However, many of these contemporary discoveries and advancements pose unique challenges that we have yet to find solutions for. As the prominence of science has grown in our society, so too have the power of mass media. While the media have done immeasurable good for the spread of vital information across the globe, the demand for dramatic stories and corporate greed brings the potential corruption. For organizations like news outlets to propagate unfounded and potentially unscientific ideas in order to bolster their profits. That, combined with social media such as Twitter, where everyone, even those with unfounded beliefs, have the ability to share and to propagate those beliefs in a negative feedback loop with other users. This leads to things such as polarization that can bring harm to others and are difficult to deconstruct. In closing, there is a quote by Karl Marx: "History repeats itself, first as a tragedy and second as a farce." In many ways, this rings true today. The COVID pandemic is a portion of history repeating itself. The Black Death was a terrible tragedy that ravaged the medieval infrastructure, and we should not have developed the hubris that we were above that. We shouldn't have 570,000 deaths and many suffering permanent organ damage. However, saying it is a farce is unfair. We've looked at some of the similarities and differences that the Black Death has with our current pandemic. The similarities show that we should have been better prepared, but on the other hand, the differences pose problems that we perhaps couldn't have feasibly prepared for. There were things we could have done to better prepare for this, but we didn't, for various reasons. Instead of wallowing in shame, we should forgive ourselves and move forward. That is not to say we should forget, quite the contrary, but acceptance of failures is crucial to the growth of any individual and any group of individuals. Growth that we will desperately need if we are to advance further as a society. Like humanity did during the Black Plague, we will endure and we will learn and we will be better for it.